You guys for attending again on this graduation Sunday. We're actually going to turn towards that passage in Jeremiah 29 in just a second. But I love graduation Sunday as a time to recognize the rite of passage. Ashlyn in her prayer, I think, put that so well of just talking about how much this is a time for us to celebrate and to celebrate the things that have gone on in these individuals' lives. But it's not just these individual lives, it's the entire community around their lives as well. I think we don't have a lot of rites of passage anymore in society. And so graduation is something we cling to, and marriage is another one that we kind of cling to as kind of rites of passage as people kind of go into adulthood. I also think it's why we celebrate graduation for like everybody at every time for all things. So it's like preschool graduation, and then kindergarten graduation, and then first grade graduation, and then middle school graduation. It's just all the time we're celebrating the graduations. And why? Because I think we've been built to recognize the rites of passage as we're continuing to mature and to grow in life. And so today, that's there, and it does something to all of us who are in the room recognizing it. Because you remember your graduation, and you remember you going through that rite of passage as well. And even for me, I'm remembering the fact that as of June 1st, I will officially have been at Aspire for 9 years. And that's super encouraging to me. To be here for 9 years and feel like y'all aren't coming to fire me yet is incredibly encouraging, so I thank you for that. But on top of that, it's fun to just be at a church that long and to watch the growth of the families and celebrate that. To remember when Ava was in elementary school, to remember people as they come in, even some of our college graduates, to remember getting to know them after their high school graduation when they're going into college, and to watch them now graduate college and to see the growth that's gone on in them is something that's exciting and something to celebrate. And even today on stage we had Sheena, and I asked her permission, which I don't even do for my own family when I use them in sermons, so feel the love there. But I asked Sheena if I could use her as an example, because Sheena kind of came in around 6th or 7th grade on just a random Wednesday night when I was running student ministry. And I remember it because she came with one other Korean student, and I'm like, cool, there are Korean students here. And I had no clue about Korean culture. And so our Korean people, I knew of them. They met on the 3rd floor, and then they transferred out to the Arlington campus within Aspire Church. And they continue to be a part of us, but I really didn't know about the Korean culture. So I just used Shine and Nur and another one of our students, Esther, and just asked them all kinds of dumb questions that I could about Korean culture to understand it better. And they did. They helped me. They were like, yeah, you're a stupid white guy, but we will love you and appreciate you nonetheless. And I think I learned more about Korean culture, I think it's funny because I was talking to Shine before this, even as second generation, they don't fully understand all of it. And so, but I did learn more about it from them than probably even Thule Mu, and just understanding more and more about the Korean culture. And even in just a few weeks, I look forward to celebrating with Shine. I asked her permission if I could do this because as the school advisory council chair for Douglas Anderson High School, I have to go to graduation. And I was trying to have purpose to it. I hope the principal isn't watching this right now. But one of the things that I wanted to do was to, like, usually if you're a parent, you can kind of like celebrate your kid kind of coming up, but I'm not a parent of anybody at DA. But I was like, could I give Shine her diploma? And so I'm really excited to just give Shine her diploma and to watch her just kind of graduate from Douglas Anderson and move out into Jacksonville University. And the picture of this connection, the picture of this community is exactly what our series, This Is Us, is about. We're exploring the new kind of family that God's desiring to create. And I think it's cool that this is Pentecost Sunday, which if you're Baptist, we usually don't celebrate things like that. But the picture, even on Pentecost and the day of Pentecost, as God was creating his church in the city of Jerusalem, and that idea that it's a bunch of people from a bunch of different places with a bunch of different languages who are becoming one family, united around Christ and the fact that he died on a cross for our sins. And that's the idea of this series. And the reality is that things continue to change in our lives. Family change over time, and so do churches. If you look around this room, you will notice that there are some people who are no longer here that were here. And if you look around the room, you'll notice that there are some new faces that you've gotten to know and that have made an impact on your life. And that's exciting. Why? Because change is a symptom of life and it's a symptom of growth. And all of the families of these graduates are about to experience that change as they send their kids off into the new unknown of college. And so one way we grow, and so it's all just a recognition of our growth. And even as organizations, we grow. This week we get to do something special as Aspire Church has grown from just these meetings on Sunday mornings to now the idea of this community center and what we offer there. And this week on Wednesday, we will get to celebrate our third graduating class of the preschool in San Marco. And it means something to me as much as I'm talking about how everybody graduates from everything. My preschooler is now growing up, and on Wednesday I will give him a Bible as he's now going off into the wild unknowns of grade school, and he's going to become an elementary kid. And for me, it's the realization that this kid isn't a toddler anymore. Like that he's not my baby. And even this week, he said something sweet because I was telling him that he's getting too big and I can't cuddle with him anymore. And he turned to me and he said, "Dad, you can always cuddle with me, and I will always let you cuddle with me." And I'm like, "Oh, that's so sweet, but I know you're lying because he's becoming a teenager every single day. And he's like, figuring out the world on his own and telling me how I don't know what I'm supposed to do and he knows better than me." And it's like, I know that that's about to be the next 12 years of my life with this child until I can kick him out. And he's already telling me, he's like, "I'm not going to leave the house." And I'm like, yes, you will. And all of it's just a reminder of growth. I can't compartmentalize him and just keep him trapped the way he is right now. I shouldn't do that because growth is a sign of life. And so how we grow matters, and that brings us to our principle for today, at least the first part of our principle for today, which is that we are locally grown. And not only are we locally grown as a church and we're deeply invested in our local community, but we serve a God who's called us to invest in the people around us, to be a family of the people around us. And he's wired us in such a way that we know that we are locally grown as humans. And there is no better biblical illustration of this than the passage that we're going to read. You saw the end of it in the video, but we're going to start at the beginning of it in Jeremiah 29. And so if you have a Bible, turn to Jeremiah 29, and we're going to start in verse 1. It's on the screen. If you don't have a Bible at the house and you want one from the pew, feel free to take that with you. And I'm going to go ahead and start reading the passage. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 1. These are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders of the exile, and to the priests, and to the prophets, and all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This was after King Jeconiah and the queen mother, the eunuchs, the officials of Judah and Jerusalem, the craftsmen, and the metal workers had departed from Jerusalem. The letter was sent by the hand of Elisha, the son of Shaphan, and Gemariah, the son of Hilkiah, whom Zedekiah, king of Judah, sent to Babylon to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And before we get to what it says, we're going to give you the context here. See, Jeremiah is writing to these people of God that are far away, and maybe what is the most challenging time that the nation of Israel ever had. Because the nation of Israel was a people that up to this point God had established. And he established by taking them out of Egypt and by placing them inside of the promised land. And even within Jerusalem, building up a city around them in which was their capital. But now what happened is that Jerusalem was besieged and Jerusalem was utterly destroyed and taken over. The Babylonians had come in and they destroyed the walls. They set themselves up, and what they ended up doing was taking all of the inhabitants of Jerusalem and becoming the rulers over the entire nation, and leading many of them astray. See, in this passage, we see something that even the king of Babylon understood, that people are locally grown. And people are loyal to their home and to their home culture. And for this reason, what he ended up doing, if you look at this, he's taking a bunch of people out of the city of Jerusalem and he's transplanting them and moving them into the city of Babylon. And so he's taking all of the elites and he's taking the skilled laborers from Jerusalem and he's moving them into the cities of Babylon. And if you want other context of this, you can read the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel has the story of a couple of these boys who are the sons of the elites inside of Jerusalem. And he's taking these sons and he's putting them inside of the court of Babylon, because what he's hoping to do is he's hoping to assimilate all of them into Babylonian society. And how he's hoping to do that is by indoctrinating them through the Babylonian schools and by taking them and making them own the Babylonian culture. But if he just kept them there in Jerusalem, they could rebel. But if they end up coming into Babylonian society, then they would end up joining into it through the generations that they live inside of the nation of Babylon. And so it's at this point that the Jews are facing a dilemma. They were now a people with no home. Many of them had already abandoned God. They had went out and they had started worshiping after other idols, longing after the other nations. And in fact, they no longer really believed in God. And how we know that is because the prophet of God, Jeremiah, was ridiculed and looked down on by all of the people inside of Jerusalem. And so what were they going to do? It would have been easy for them to give in. They were just a small pocket of a culture in the midst of these cities with plenty of other cultures. What were they going to do? I mean, what choice did they have? This nation just brutally defeated them. It killed many of their friends. It destroyed their home. What could they do? Some people had the bright idea that they were going to continue in this captivity to build these communities on the outskirts of town, and they would celebrate their cultural heritage in these ghettos of conquered peers. And who would blame them for that? They were just trying to keep who they were in the outskirts of these towns. But why would they want to join in with these people who captured them? Like, just put yourself in their position. Why would you want to join in with the people who captured you? And it's in that emotional feeling, it's in that historical setting that the prophet Jeremiah is writing to all of these people who are exiled into the land of Babylon. And this is what Jeremiah says. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I, God, have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. See, God's message to the exiles doesn't begin with grace and love. Often what we want when our life is absolutely transformed and turned over is for God to just give us some warm, heartfelt feeling of grace and love. But that's not what he says at all. He's writing to the losers of this war to let them know that he, God, sent them into exile. He removed them from the land that they always knew. That he was the one who did it. And what an incredibly challenging idea. That when you're in the midst of some challenging situations in your life, it may be done through the hands of a Babylonian king, but God is still in control of that situation. And that is challenging, and that is hard. But that is exactly what God is saying at this point in time. And as hard as this is for us to accept, I believe this letter reminds us that sometimes the God who plants us in a place will sometimes transplant us into a new place through the challenging circumstances. God transplants us. God had a purpose for his people in Babylon. If they were going to grow and thrive in this new land, then they would have to embrace the reality that God had moved them from where they were to where they are now. And you've been here before. You've had your life change because of something that was outside of your control. And your life has been radically altered. Maybe it was a medical situation that required a move in your life. Maybe it was a family member who got a job in another city, and to support that family member, it was out of your control and you needed to move. Or maybe it was a burning call, even on a more positive light. It's a burning call and a desire in your life that you know you couldn't do anything else. It was outside of your control and you had to go to a new place. Whatever forced you to move, the reality is that ultimately God may be the one who has transplanted your life for a higher purpose that sometimes is hard for us to see. just like it was hard for these people in exile to see that there was a higher purpose here. It's essential for us to make a distinction here because God will transplant us, but oftentimes when we're doing it under our own power, we are going to uproot ourselves. And sometimes God will use some forces outside of our control to transplant our lives, and we will actually try to resist it because it feels like uprooting. I understand it. It feels like uprooting in our lives, so we will resist it, especially when we're facing these challenging circumstances. But if we truly believe that God is the God who is in control of all things and that he can use for good what others intended as evil. And this goes to the core of the salvation message, because at the core of the salvation message is this reality that what others intended for evil in the cross, God took that and made it for our good and our salvation. And if we've accepted that for our salvation, then we need to learn to be humble and accept that in the rest of our lives, even when it's difficult. Why? Because we believe in a God that works all things together for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purposes. And we must believe that God's hand in transplanting us when things are beyond our control, when forces beyond our control conspire to force us to move when we do not want to move, we have to accept that God is still in control in the exile. Are you willing to be transplanted? In those points, the question for us is really a question of, are we willing to be transplanted by God when things are out of our control? And there's an alternative danger to this, though, when we do have control. See, when things are hard, oftentimes we are tempted to take matters into our own hand. And what we'll do is sometimes when things are hard, we'll actually uproot ourselves and run away. And we need to be careful not to uproot ourselves where God has planted us, but be humble in trusting God to transplant us into the places where he desires it. And so an example of this is we're going to look at Jeremiah. And for you guys in your small groups this week, you're going to look at this situation not from the people who were sent into Babylon, but you're going to look at it from the perspective of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah, it's incredibly interesting because Jeremiah lived a horrible life in the city of Jerusalem. He lived a horrible life in the city of Jerusalem. People continued to go against him. It was just extremely challenging for him inside of the city. And then when Babylon came over, the Babylonian king and officials actually gave Jeremiah the chance to leave Jerusalem and to join as an advisor and effectively live a life as a king in Babylon. And instead, Jeremiah decided that he wasn't going to go. Because Jeremiah understood that he was locally grown inside of the city of Jerusalem. And he wasn't going to uproot his life just because the circumstances around his life are now even harder. But that he was going to make sure that God was actually moving him when he had a choice. Jeremiah knew that if we uproot ourselves from where God wants us, then we will remove ourselves from God's provisions that he's given us to survive in the place where he has planted us. See, graduates, I have advice for you. You'll be offered a lot of life choices. And make sure that whatever the options are that you face, that you let God be the driving force in the decision that you make. Because there are a lot of choices that all of us are offered. That advice isn't just for the graduates. It's for the students that are still inside of this room, and it's for the adults that are also inside of this room. We live in a day where there is a lot of freedom for us inside of America. I mean, the truth for anybody inside this room is that you are one of the richest people who have existed across all of human history. And I'm not lamenting that reality. The truth is, I love that reality. I like my life. But there's a challenge there in that we have a lot of blessing. We have a lot of power. We have a lot of privilege. And just the old statement from Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. There you go. We have a lot of responsibility in our life about what will we choose to do. Because you have the ability to choose where you will live. For the vast majority of human life, people didn't have a choice about what they would choose, where they would choose to live, what they would choose to do, who they would choose to marry. And maybe this isn't a physical move that this relates to your life on. Maybe it's something else. Maybe there's a desire in your life to move to a different relationship, a desire to move to a different job, or maybe even a desire to move to a different family. But be careful that you are not uprooting yourself from the place where God has put you. Let God be the one that transplants you when it's your time to move. And so God will transplant us, but what are we transplanted to do? And this is where we'll continue on in Jeremiah 29, verse 4. God tells these exiles to build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For its welfare you will find, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. See, if God is transplanting you, even if it feels like exile in your current situation, He is doing it for a reason. The religious leaders in that day and age were offering those people who were in exile some bad advice. They were telling them to hide from the city. They were telling them to resist the city and even to hate the city. And so get in these small pockets of communities and be in isolation away from the city and despise it. However, God was challenging them to do something else. God not only wanted the people to be locally grown, but God wanted them to bloom where He had transplanted them. And that's the entire principle for today's sermon. You are locally grown, so you must bloom where you are planted. If you want your life to bear fruit, you must accept that the successes and failures that made you who you are today were there for a reason. The Jews in exile had to admit that they had failed to live according to God's ways. They were exiled because God was using the exile to rescue them from their own sin and rebellion that they had committed back in the land of Jerusalem. But God wanted them to accept their failures and succeed by finding Him in the place where He had transplanted them. God had called the nation of Israel when He moved them from Egypt into the promised land to be a light to all the nations and to radically cling to Him and reject the pagan idols that were all around. But they failed. They failed and they continued to worship the other gods. They failed and they continued to build altars in the high places. And they continued to intermarry with the people who were around them that were worshiping false gods and bringing those false gods into their relationships. And they failed to cling to God, and this led to their destruction. But even though they had repeatedly failed in their call, God was not done with them. And that is actually the story of grace and love that's found in this message to these exiles. God wanted them to now live in a new way. They were still supposed to cling to them. That never changed. But they weren't to become isolationist. Instead, in this new city, they were to be a light by planting gardens and living long enough that the homes in which they now lived, they were able to eat the fruit from the trees that they are now planting. That in the homes that they were defined in this nation of Babylon, they were supposed to grow up generations of people with the other nations. And so that in the midst of the other nations, people would be able to see God working through His special people and see God through them. That didn't change either. This call to the nation of Israel was a precursor to the call for churches worldwide. The nation of Israel was called to be a light in the nations, and now the church is called to be a city on a hill. And what's even more special is the nation was called to be the light with Israel, but now each of us Christians are called to be a light in the darkness now. It's far more personal. One of our core statements here at Aspire is that the light that shines the farthest shines the brightest at home. And this means that you will not be effective anywhere if you are not first effective here. As a church, this is a call for us to be committed to the community where God has planted us, to be rooted in San Marco and Jacksonville. And for us, that does mean that we need to take care of this building that is old. And old buildings are hard to take care of. But we need to be committed to this area. And we need to be committed to the people, places, and entities around us and to support them. This is why, as a church, we support things like the San Marco Merchants Association, because we want to be involved in the places in which people work. And to recognize that all of you, many of you work here in San Marco, and to support that, to support your work that you do. This is why sometimes we're involved in the conversations with San Marco Preservation, because we want to know from the community what is stirring their hearts. We want to know what is stirring the hearts of the people who are living around here, just to know what is going on inside of the homes. We want to know and care about the passions of the people who work and live all around us. And this is why we partner with Spring Park Elementary. And they were just here a few weeks ago, and you had the chance to meet them. This is why we partner with Landon Middle School whenever they're open for us. This is why, even for Douglas Anderson, I go there and I support them on SAC, and we support them when they raise needs and ask us questions on how we can help. Even when they just had a power outage, they called us up and said, hey, we had a power outage, could we use your building for something? Like, to me, that is encouraging. It's incredibly encouraging when local schools turn to the church and say, how can you help us right now? Because we're in a place of need and we would like some help. These are our closest neighborhood schools, and God has opened the doors for us to be a light that shines sometimes in the darkest places, and not to run whenever things get dark, but instead to be willing to say, that is where I'm supposed to go. The call to bloom where you're planted is why we have not abandoned San Marco when so many other churches have sold their property and moved out to the suburbs. And this gets to the heart of revitalization and what I think God taught me in the midst of COVID, which is that maybe, just maybe, we as Aspire Church can have a special relationship here in San Marco with the people who are all around us. And maybe, just maybe, if I want revival to happen in the city in which I am in, then maybe other communities around this city will see what happens inside of San Marco and realize that it's different. And if it's different because the local church there is helping to support whatever God is doing in and around that community. And maybe if multiple of these communities actually saw something different happen, that the world would look at that and say, man, that's different. And maybe in a state like Florida, other cities would say, well, what caused that change? And how powerful would it be if the change was rooted inside of local Christians and local churches acting like the light in dark places? And maybe a change could happen nationally because other states would see what would change inside of Florida and would say, man, we want that change to happen. And I don't think this is just a pipe dream, because this is exactly what happened inside of the Roman Empire when they couldn't stop the church's expansion as the church was doing things to meet the needs of the horrible nation around it in Rome. By the church just choosing to love and be a force for good in an evil world. And I don't think that call has changed. To be effective outside of our homes, to be effective outside of our communities, we just need to be effective wherever God has planted us. And so to be effective outside of your home, you must begin by being effective inside of your home too. If you want the people in our church and in our community to see how your faith in God has affected you, you have to first begin by making sure that your family knows how your faith has affected you. You need to bloom in the family in which God has placed you. And if you're going to produce fruit inside of your home, you have to first begin by staying connected to Jesus and loving him with all of your heart, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. This is what Jesus means in John 15 when he says that he is the vine and apart from him we can do nothing. And this is why I love that our series, This Is Us, is coming right after our series where we talked about the care and feeding of the human soul. Because we have to learn, how do we love God in order to love ourselves and love the people around us? And so let it begin from the inside and then travel out to the expressions. And so to tie all of this together, here are some practical steps and practices that you can do. And I'm doing it through these 3 evaluations. And through these evaluations, just see, are you blooming where God has planted you? So first, evaluate your relationship with God. One easy way of doing this is every third Sunday, and you missed it. Today's the third Sunday, so I'm sorry. But every third Sunday, come back next third Sunday, and you'll be able to go to Next Steps. And I love Next Steps. It's a place where you get to know the church, get to know a little bit more about how you can connect. But on the third step, we actually give a tool to you for you to help understand and investigate with God on how are you uniquely made and how does God want you to uniquely grow. And even next week, Gary is going to continue this series. This is us with a conversation about how we are handcrafted, not mass-produced. And in that, it's this idea that God wants to pour into us, that followers of Jesus Christ are uniquely handcrafted by God. And so evaluate your relationship with God and stay connected to Him throughout the week. Second, evaluate your relationship with your family. And this may be my most challenging question that I wrote down in the midst of the sermon, but it was, when is the last time you had a check-in with the closest family members in your life? And I wrote down, okay, we'll have 3 30-minute conversations with your family this week. And why? Because it's challenging. Time happens. And it's challenging because the thought of having 3 30-minute conversations with my family is sometimes hard to fit into our schedules. But there is nothing more practical than saying, how am I building the relationship with the individual members of my family? And this doesn't just apply if you have kids. Like if you're an empty nester, or maybe you're just dating somebody, get this practice in now. Or maybe even you're married, but you don't have any kids. Do this. Have 3 30-minute conversations with your significant other. And for some of y'all in this room, that may sound incredibly challenging, and that may sound exhausting. But I promise you, I'm not telling you what to talk about. I'm not saying go open a Bible and have a 30-minute Bible study with them. I'm just saying, have a conversation. What were their joys? What were their successes? What was their struggle? What were their failures? What do they think about you? That's challenging. You ask that to your toddler. You may not want to. But go through it and just have some conversations and evaluate your relationship with your family. Finally, evaluate your relationship with your community. Where has God planted you? Are you actively involved in the life of your neighborhood? Are you actively involved in the life of your child's school? Are you actively involved in the work relationships that you have? See, I promise that if you can do these things, that God's work in and through you will just be amazing. And we're going to end this service not with a song or for anybody to come down front. I mean, if you want to talk to me, you can after the service. I would love to talk to you guys. But the action step for each of us in this room is to do this work. And this work is sometimes harder than just walking an aisle. And sometimes this work, it takes a lot more time. But if you're going to do this work, it has to first start within you. In a month from now, we're going to be celebrating Baptism Sunday. And I'm excited because after the first service, I saw 2 people who we baptized last year and got a chance just to celebrate with them and thinking, man, it's already been a year since they were baptized and how time just flies. But for you guys, if you've never made that decision to go through that Christian rite of passage and baptism, I encourage you to do that and to signify in your own heart that you are going to follow after Christ, that your old self has passed away and all things are going to become new. And so enjoy that and let the work start within you in a decision to follow after Christ and be baptized. But on top of that, one of the greatest ways that you can also apply this sermon is just through community. One of our other core statements here at this church is that circles are better than rows. And why is that? That's because all of y'all have so great in this room, being quiet and just letting me talk. And you guys can't just yell out, because if you yell out everything and just have a question, what will happen is people just start looking at you. And so for you guys, here's the reality. if you're going to start applying this, you need to talk this stuff through. How does this apply to your life? I had a fun conversation with somebody right after the first service, and they were just talking about the challenges because their work is now farther away from their home, and just the challenge of them just rationalizing it. And I'm not telling them to stop going to that work or move your entire house, because I think that's the job of the community that you are involved in, your spiritual community, and having those honest questions with them just to say, I'm struggling with this, or this is a thought I had. What are your thoughts? And you can't do that in a sermon. I can't do that with everybody in this room. But you can do that through a small group. And so join in a small group community and have true, open-hearted life conversations and discuss how you're trying to apply what you feel like God is calling you to do into your life.